Members of City Council, please attend a call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 5 p.m. Tuesday, December 8th, 2015, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry.
Here.
Dr. Edmonds.
Here.
Mr. Meeks. Mr. Moody.
Here.
Ms. Simmons.
Here.
Dr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mayor Wright.
Here.
Dr. Pat.
Good evening. How you doing, Doc?
Good. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. During tonight's public work session, we have 3 presentations. However, before announcing our first presentation, I'm pleased to have 4 of our newly appointed department heads present this evening, and I'd like to introduce them. Mrs. Mallory C. Butler, Director, if you would stand, Director of Economic Development. Mrs. Erin Tremere, Director of Public Utilities. Mrs. Alice M. Kelly, CPA, Chief Financial Officer, and Mrs. Elaine Braithwaite, Director of Behavioral Health Care Services. We welcome them. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The first presentation we have tonight. No, hold on. Our first presentation will be the 2015 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which is known as CAFRA, or CAR. Presenting tonight will be Cherry Beckett Partners. Who we have present is Mrs. Krista Edoff, who is an audit partner, and Mrs. Laura Harden, the senior manager. Members of City Council, over the past 6 months, our staff has worked with Cherry Beckett to provide detailed information, answer questions, and provide financial data in order to develop this report that is before you this evening. I'd like to thank our financial team for their dedication to this project and their accomplishments. Mrs. Edoff will make the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of City Council, Madam City Manager, and all others present tonight. I'm pleased to be here with you to report the results of the fiscal year 15 audit. So first, we were engaged by you to audit not only the city, but its component units, the school board, the Economic Development Authority, and the Port and Industrial Commission. So within the CAFR that you have in front of you, it includes the city's financial statements as well as the financial results for those 3 component units. In addition to the financial statements, we are also required to conduct an audit on your compliance with the Commonwealth of Virginia's Auditor of Public Accounts, specifications for audits of counties, cities, and towns. So there's certain laws and regulations within the Commonwealth of Virginia that you're required to comply with, and we have to perform tests of those transactions. In addition, you receive federal money in the form of grants, and we're also required to perform a single audit over those federal grants that you receive. So in addition to just the financial statements, we do conduct compliance audits for those 2 other purposes. Now I stand before you tonight and I'm happy to say that we do have an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, on the financial statement document that you have in front of you. Now, when we conduct our audit, we do test the material balances and transactions that you see presented within those financial statements that you have in front of you. In addition to testing those material balances and transactions, we are required to gain an understanding of the city's control environment over the significant transactions that you do conduct. And the purpose of that internal control understanding really is to help us in the design of our audit. It's not to issue a separate report or opinion expressly on internal controls. So I know those of you that have heard me talk before, I'll tell you again, if you're familiar with the SOX 404 type reporting of internal controls over these SEC large companies, there's nothing of that magnitude pushed down to local governments. So there is no internal control reporting specifically for local governments. So, in addition, if anything in this report impacts the comparability to last year, I need to tell you about it. So we do point that out in our report specifically. So the city implemented GASB 68 and GASB 71 this year, which you may have heard about. And what those standards did was bring the VRS pension liabilities and your supplemental pension plan liabilities onto your statement of net position. So you now see, you would have seen that information historically in required supplemental information. Those big pension liabilities are actually now on the face of your financial statements. So that's a very significant impact to the financial results that you'll see in this CAFR if you try to compare it to the CAFR that was presented last year. So in addition, there was a restatement of the public utilities balances that were presented last year to make them correctly reported in the report this year.
Let me ask you real quick, the implementation of the new standards and you hadn't to put in the pension obligation piece, what did that overall do from your perspective to our numbers? Nothing? It was just a format and how you need to show those numbers going forward, or?
Not really. From a significance impact, the biggest impact you would probably question would say, what's this going to do to our bond ratings?
Yes, you can.
And so, in general, it shouldn't impact your bond ratings because the bond agencies are aware of this. They knew that liability existed. They knew historically the majority of that liability was recorded in your required supplementary information. The only caveat to that is the school's teacher pool pension liability, which is housed and paid at the state level. So historically, that liability has never been broken up by a school district. And so in the current year, what they've done is go allocate that liability to each of the school districts. So that's the only new component that you'll see in this financial, that the information wasn't historically in there. However, your bond agents still knew about that information. The rating agencies knew about it. So from a significancy factor, what's the impact? Probably not much at face value.
Okay.
So, but if I'm someone and I'm looking at your financial statements and I'm recording this big liability on the books, in many cases, and especially at schools, what it does is takes your net position and makes it negative. Because you're taking this really large liability that essentially is going to be paid out to retirees over the next 30 years, and you're discounting it and you're capturing it in the current year. So it's such a substantial number. It's, in the scheme of things, makes your total liability population bigger than the assets you're holding. So in some cases it is put in, and it's not specific to City of Portsmouth, it's statewide, it's countrywide, creating a negative number in your net position, which doesn't look good, but it's essentially not that meaningful.
Thank you.
So it's such a big long-term liability.
Yeah, we talked about this the last several years in New York with the bond rating. They pretty much said the same thing you did, but my concern was it GASB, is it 50 or
68.
68? When the whole piece, what would it look from the untrained eye looking at our
Right.
net position and showing that it could have an effect on our capacity or ability to do that? They said just what you said. I mean, because we always had a supplemental to talk about this piece and all. But anyway, thank you.
Absolutely. So in addition to the financial statements themselves, we do conduct the testing and over compliance with laws and regulations and federal grants. And we do issue 2 separate opinions in the back in the compliance or single audit section of the report. And again, I'm pleased to report that we do have unmodified opinions on both of those reports. Again, unmodified means clean. It is the best opinion you could hope for. Now, when we do conduct our testing, we do test certain transactions and we do test certain internal controls. Not to be able to opine on the entire internal control environment, but we do test bits and pieces, and we are required to gain an understanding of the whole environment. So if any matters were to come to our attention that could be deficiencies in the control environment, we'd have to bring that to your attention and report those to you. As well, when we're conducting our testing, if any matters of non-compliance pops up in our testing, again, we're required to report those to you. And those are reported behind our reports in the back in a schedule of findings and question costs. Now, in the current year, because there was a restatement to the public utility funds, we consider that deficiency internal controls because the controls essentially weren't in place in the past to catch that error from happening. So we did report a material weakness in internal control for this matter. Now, as you can understand, there's been significant turnover throughout the city. And anytime turnover happens within a city environment, that's times where often weaknesses in internal control can happen. Just because a position's vacant, so no one's performing that duty or internal control maybe that was there before. So as you can imagine, with some of the turnover that's happened citywide, deficiencies in internal control are pretty understandable at this point. So in addition to internal control, we do have 4 instances of non-compliance with certain of the state laws and regulations that we did report in detail in the back of the schedule that I am just required to alert.
They were minor.
Yes. So in conducting our audit, there are some things I am required to tell you. Not every number within this financial statement is a hard and fast number. Cash is a hard and fast number. I can go to the bank and verify that that's a hard and fast number. That's the amount I have. But when it comes to making an allowance for doubtful accounts, so what you may collect on property taxes in the future, you have to kind of conduct an estimate, and you base it on some historical trend and collection rates. When you're doing depreciation expense, that's based on useful lives of assets. Well, in general, a car may last you 5 to 7 years, but again, that's just an estimate. It could last you 10 years. And the last big one is your actuarially computed liabilities. Those are your pension liability, your OPEB liability, self-insurance liabilities. Those are based on significant assumptions to come up with those numbers. So they're not hard and fast numbers. There's some estimation involved. So the point of me telling you that is not every number in here is a hard and fast number. Some of them are estimates. They're based on estimates. They're based on assumptions, but the best assumptions that management knows at the time, and they could be subject to change in the future. So as we conclude, I'm going to tell you if we were to have disagreements with management in the conduct of the audit, we'd be required to tell you that, and I'm happy to tell you would not have any disagreements with management. We did not have any difficulties encountered when we performed the audit. We did not have any uncorrected misstatements, so that would mean we find an error and it was maybe below an acceptable dollar amount and management chose not to make it. So there was no transaction of that nature. At the conclusion of the audit, we do require that management sign a letter representing to us that they've provided us with everything we need to conduct the audit, to make sure that the numbers and the financials are correct, that they're accurately and materially reported. Management did sign that letter and provide it to us. Additionally, in order for us to conduct an audit, you'll see on our report, it does say report of independent auditor. So we do have to be independent and maintain independence. And that means that we don't have any family relationships or other closely held relationships of investments or anything of that nature, similar to your conflicts of interest that would cause us to give the city kind of an unbiased audit opinion. So we do maintain that independence over the city. So lastly, I will tell you about some upcoming standards that are going to impact your financial statements. GASB 72 and GASB 77 are upcoming effective next year. They really just require you to add some additional disclosures for your fair value of investments, very similar to what you'd see in the private environment, and additionally tax abatement disclosures. So currently, The city probably has several tax abatement programs that they work with and operate with. Those currently aren't disclosed in the financials, and going forward, you're going to have to put some information about those programs and dollar amounts of any abatements that you give. The last one and the big one is GASB 75. It's effective June 30, 2018, so you have 3 more years. But what this is going to do is the same thing that GASB 68 and GASB 71 did, but it's for your OPEB, so your healthcare retiree liabilities. So it's going to bring that large healthcare retiree liability onto your books, just like you just did for pension. But we're 3 years out from that. But that's another one that's going to have a pretty significant impact to your numbers on the face of the statements. So with that, I'd really like to thank Mrs. Duffy, Mrs. Kelly, and all others that helped us throughout the course of the audit. We really couldn't do it without their compilation and assistance.
With
that, I'll take any questions you might have.
From any members of council? All right, thank you. Very good.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Mrs. Liedel. Our second presentation tonight, Mr. Chris Steele, who is Assistant Superintendent of Budget and Planning for Portsmouth Public Schools, is with us tonight to present the Portsmouth Public Schools first quarter financial report. As you requested, such presentations will be made by the schools in conjunction with the City Council's quarterly appropriation. Tonight, members of City Council, you will have the third appropriation coming before you for approval from Portsmouth Public Schools. Mr. Steele.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, Dr. Patton. I'm pleased to present the first quarter. This is for the quarter ending 30 September. And you were provided the quarterly report that was provided to the school board and approved. And I'm going to give some highlights and what to look for in the next quarter as we go through the fiscal year. In the report that you see, one of the things you'll see on particularly page 4, which compares previous years to the current year, when you're looking at the expenditure as a percent of the total budget, our expenditure rate is consistent with the previous years for the first quarter. You'll also see that we're about $17.5 million under budget, and what I mean by that is that our spend pattern is in straight line. So for the first quarter, of course, we don't start school until September. So a lot of our expenses for teachers and payroll and things like that aren't hitting in July and August, and actually those payments are hitting in the second and third quarter. So you'll see, looking forward, instruction especially, which is our biggest category, is going to ramp up significantly in the second and third quarters. And again, that goes to the third bullet, is that our spend pattern overall and by category is not straight line. So the first quarter is overall is low, but you also see that technology and operations and maintenance as a percent of their category is very high in the first quarter. So in operations and technology, you're getting ready for school to start, for instance. So you're putting a lot into the schools and spending a lot in the first quarter. Instruction isn't spending, but you'll see going into the second quarter, instruction then will become the predominant category that's being spent. One of the funds we have maintained in the past is the print shop, and you'll see in your report that we've gone to zero with the print shop because we've closed the print shop. So going forward, you'll probably not see that fund being displayed in the report.
And how's that working for you on what you're having to spend to print?
Indications are that it's working very well with us. We have found a number of service providers that have met our needs, and for a number of different reasons, we see the amount of spend for printing has gone down. That may be attributed to other factors besides just the print shop closing, but our amount of spend right now for printing is down. Revenue is on target, but one of the things we're somewhat concerned about is ADM, which is our enrollment or average daily membership, has started lower than forecast. Our initial forecast was a little over 14,200, and it's coming in about 14,100. Right now, that impacts state funding, of course, because most of our state funding is based on per pupil or ADM amounts. And right now, that has an impact of about $750,000 of revenue from the state that is lower than what we expected just from looking at September. Now, we track ADM through the year and every month, and September tends to be lower, and then it'll start creeping up in October, November. It usually peaks in January, and then historically, we've seen it tail off again. So we have to monitor that closely because the state revenue is based on the ADM as of 31 March. And so the total state funding for the year is really determined 3/4 of the way through the year. So we have to monitor that revenue, and we really won't know that figure as a solid figure until the end of April or the beginning of May. So for next quarter, what to look for, again, to continue to look at expenditure rates overall and by category, and we're continuing to monitor the ADM trend because that has a significant impact. And one of the things City Council had talked about, and also our school board, and we're going to add to our quarterly report, is an assessment of our health self-insurance status. So we're going to add that to the quarterly report that goes before the school board and also City Council.
Okay. Yes, sir. Mr. Meeks.
That is my
On your, I got one question for you.
Sure.
On your, with the pupils, it's 100 less. It works out to be $75,000. Is it per child? Is it because of different services, or the $750,000 works out to be about $75,000 a child? Is it because the state gives us so much money for different services that the school supposed to provide, or?
Well, the state has a pretty complicated funding formula, and it's divided into different categories. So you have basic aid, and there's different amounts in basic aid. There's also incentive programs, and then there's lottery programs. Those are the big three ones. So they're divided differently. So that's really a total amount, and the amounts per, say, ADM, depending if they're a special ed student or whatever, that'll be affected by one of the line items where we get additional funding for, say, special needs children and things like that. But that's the overall impact. They're under the Virginia Department of Education site, they basically take the Appropriation Act and incorporate that into an online tool that you can track changes to ADM and see exactly how it's going to affect your state funding. So that's what we use to keep track of how it's going to affect our revenue.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
That 14,100 was under what was forecast. How does it compare to the year-over-year number?
The long-term trend, say 10 years ago, we were well over 15,000 ADM, and we came down from that, but now it's starting to level off. In fact, last year we saw a bump up, but now it's down lower than what was forecast. And our forecasts primarily rely on Weldon Cooper from the University of Virginia, who look at localities, and that's the basis that the state uses for determining state funding initially, or defaults to, for localities. And local school districts, can make modifications to that if they have information that shows they have a better forecast than Weldon Cooper. But we've tended to use Weldon Cooper from the University of Virginia.
So the 2014 number was
13.
Was a Weldon Cooper number, and their number isn't being realized right now. It's lower than what they forecast.
Yes.
I had a question. Mr. Steele, we know that March is the critical time period when that ADM number is determined. Is there anything that is done or can be done to help the community understand the importance of that month and that tracking and how it impacts the funding for the school. I don't know if parents are aware or, something to make our students come to school so they can be accounted for in the number.
Maybe Dr. Bracy could address it also, but I do know that one of the things that's presented to the board every year is the attendance rate at the schools. We kind of even give awards for that. And also the schools are very mindful of that being a key performance indicator to keep the attendance rate up as much as possible. So it is one of the key performance things that is monitored and emphasized.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, Dr. Woodham?
Still, could you elaborate on the fact that the state is funding through the ADM count based on March 30, and with this city council funding at the quarterly increment, how does that impact on how the school is financed? Does that put a stress on the system, or what? With you have one that you're waiting almost 3/4 of the way into the school system, and you have one that's funding you at a quarterly basis.
Well, of course, we get most of our funding from the state, so we are monitoring the ADM and the revenue we're going to get from the state. And we have to actually start making adjustments before finding out March 31st. So if it's coming in a lot less or even a lot more, we need to adjust accordingly. If it's coming in less, we won't be able to even spend to the appropriation that was approved by City Council because we're getting less revenue than was built into the appropriation. If it's coming in a lot more, we'd have to monitor it and actually request City Council to increase our appropriation based on additional state funding that would be coming in. As far as the quarterly appropriation, right now City Council passed that and it's a straight line across, and as we showed here that our spending pattern is not straight line, but we are not constrained initially overall because we don't have school July and August, so we kind of start out ahead like you saw, and then we're catching up.
Right.
What it does affect us though is by category, because we're going, it's impacting and going over a straight line projection, and for the smaller categories, we need more money in the first quarter. So I think if quarterly appropriations are going to continue, I think we need to modify more of the quarterly appropriation versus straight line versus something else that reflects reality, because we don't want to impact on spending something that we have to hold off to the second quarter because it's straight line.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Seal.
Nice tie.
Okay. All right, for our third presentation, members of City Council, you have in front of you the City Council Vision Principles for the year 2030. Tonight, we'd like to review with you your vision principles for the year 2030. This biennial review allows members of the City Council to provide strategic direction that targets the delivery of work that moves our city forward toward the year 2030. These vision principles touch all aspects of municipal government, our programs, and our service delivery. As you know, in the city manager's report over the past years, at the end of each report, it names what vision principle it touches, which comes from the city's vision principles. Tonight review will give you the opportunity to provide your input from now through the first of the year. During our first City Council meeting on January the 12th, 2016, we'd like to have the signing of the Portsmouth City Council Vision Principles for the year 2030. You have 3 items in your packet that's in front of you. The first is your vision principles as they are now, that are online and available to the public. The second document are your vision principles with some editorial changes or suggestions which impact the direction of which the work and the goals that are set, or the vision that we have in the work that we're doing, that kind of makes us look toward what is expected, what are the things that are changing from innovation to technology. So it's kind of like an updating of some of the statements in your principles. The third sheet actually shows the actual document from the edited sheet, and we had Councilwoman Simmons to submit her recommended additions and tweakings to the proud military history that calls into mind the historic Navy commands. The Norfolk Naval Shipyard actually names those actual facilities that are key here in the city of Portsmouth, and identifies us in this particular principle as the U.S. Coast Guard city. And she goes on to encompass in some of what is already in the statement that we have to say we embrace our rich military history, which trace to colonial days and recognize the contributions and sacrifices made by our armed forces and civilian workforce. And the city is a good regional steward toward efforts to strengthen our ties to the military. The Portsmouth family preserves the proudest tradition of the past for our future.
The only change was adding the commands and the civilian workforce
Right, which
to the
were
armed
not
forces.
in there.
The rest of it's just
right.
grammatically to make it work.
That's
And I
right.
don't know if any other council members have anything that they input. The manager and I met and actually discussed this in a little detail, and the recommendation was to give you the middle section of the recommended changes so you would have something to look at, and hopefully by the next meeting, we can adopt these and then sign this piece in. So if any council member have anything they want to add, just get with
Send it to me.
the clerk or the manager, and we'll incorporate those things. And just make sure you copy others, so we, just like Elizabeth did, because I don't think there was a issue with her comments. And so we want to make sure that we have this thing and that keep this document live, because again, everything we do spins off of one of these pieces in all of our categories. And so with that, thank you. Anything else you have on that matter?
Mayor, that ends my 3 presentations for tonight.
Is there any reason the 4 directors that you announced were all female?
Because they're the best.
I said that publicly, and so I just didn't know if she took that literally or not, but no. Thank you very much. Is there anything else? Any council liaisons? And I know we've got a motion to go into close, but prior to I think we've got one issue here with the attorney, but prior to getting to him, anything else we got there? Okay, Mr. Ashby.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members, 2 sessions ago, you tasked me to look into the disparity study contract with regard to the existing contract with the school board, and I have done as you all have asked, met with a number of staff members and reviewed the Portsmouth Public Schools existing contract with an eye towards what I understood, having reviewed the council's August 25th, 2015 meeting. At that time, two meetings ago, you all asked me to take a look at the issue and to determine whether or not the city attorney's office had the capability of developing a policy. And, well, you asked 3 questions were raised. One, whether or not the city could, in fact, what we call piggyback onto the school board's contract for services with Transformation Inc. with regard to a disparity study. The school board contract does provide the required language in order for the city to what we call cooperatively procure or piggyback off of the school board contract should the city council choose to do so. Second, there was a question as to whether or not the city attorney's office could, in fact, develop a policy and procedure. And in order to take a look at that question, I did look back at the August 25th, 2015 presentation to the council, where there were a number of elements laid out. Having looked at that, as that policy was laid out on August 25th, there are some elements of that would be beyond the capabilities of the city attorney's office and that would naturally rise out of other departments. And so I wanted to make the council aware of that, although regardless of however the council chooses to move forward, certainly the city attorney's office would be heavily involved in whatever process the council would choose to, however the council chooses to move forward. I did confer with Dr. Patton as well as others, and as was presented, as that process was presented on August 25th, certainly it requires some inputs from council as to emphasis and direction. The current contract with Portsmouth Public Schools is rather extensive and multi-year. In order to answer the other questions with regard to how could the city move forward piggybacking off of the school board's contract and what that cost may be should the council choose to move forward, it would require a defining of a scope of work as well as a discussion with the vendor in order to answer that particular question. And there may be additional questions that the council may need to address, and some of those may require a closed session if the council chooses to see fit. But I wanted to make sure I reported to the council there is a contract provision that would allow piggybacking. As that policy was described to you all, it requires more than the city attorney's office in order to develop that policy. And then there again, to move forward with some sort of piggyback contract, it would require defining a scope in order to answer any further questions that the council may have. If there are any other questions, I'll or the city manager may be able to answer those.
Okay. So, yeah, Dr. Wood.
So at this point then, given that we have the cooperative agreement language in the school board contract, then will you be meeting with the vendor to get that scope of work and costs back to council so that we can move forward with voting so that we can get the policy in place?
You want to answer that? I want to interject it. I think you tasked me with actually steering that piece, and I think I need to be the person driving that one to make sure we get the scope of work with the advice of him and the procurement officer. But what I wanted to do was get all the stakeholders, once we were clear as to what we wanted, and then when we defined the scope, we wanted to invite her in, have all the stakeholders there to let her clearly know what we wanted to do, and then get some input from her as to what we put into the scope to make sure there are clear lines between what we're asking to be done from the council versus what the contract was with the school board, and then get a cost and a time frame. And I think when she came and presented to us, she gave us some rough ideas, but never gave a refined number on the cost piece or the time frame. And so I wanted to make sure we were all clear. Then I wanted to do that. But again, I wanted to have the attorney as well as the procurement office with her in, so we can kind of, because we all new to this, and that was, I think, one of the reasons why you recommended that she come in and give us a brief overview of next steps after you get the disparity study. Then what do you do? And so based on what she's told us and what we want as a council, we want to make sure we break and sectionalize some of those tasks that the school board was given. Mr. Attorney, where you want to add something there?
I will certainly, as I said before, I will certainly be involved in the process to the extent that, and however the council chooses to see fit in terms of trying to keep that process in line with the council's expectation as soon as you all give me those marching orders and parameters.
Right, but right now the council has said we want to do just the policy. And so that's the only directive that we've got. So we want to sit down with all the stakeholders and talk just policy. And then implementation and all of those other things will be done in done it another time, but right now, in this, I think we all talk policy. Okay, all right, Vice Mayor.
I'll yield to Mr. Moody.
No, Vice Mayor, I got
Okay,
you.
I have two questions.
Okay.
Number one, it's three questions, sorry. There is a employee already in the school system that manages this, is that correct? Dr. Patton?
I can't answer that.
Steele's doing
Dr.
it?
Bracy's shaking his head.
Is there a human being, is there an employee in the school system that manages this disparity policy?
Yes,
You have an employee that does that?
we do.
And are they in your procurement department?
They are.
Okay. Could we at least look at sharing services with that person or department
That's
who already
fine. We wanna
knows
do that.
what the story is? That's number one. Number two, if we're going to spend more money to procure additional services for this policy, yeah, I want to use the right word, then shouldn't we be going out to look for vendors to do that and not just the same person who gave us the policy? Aren't we doing exactly what this policy was intended
No.
to, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the
You
answer
told
is
me
no.
what, okay,
Right.
why is the answer no?
And, no, just because, well, go ahead. What was your third
Yeah,
one?
well, I think that's it. If we're going to spend
Okay.
money for additional policy, why are we going back to the same people? What, shouldn't we be putting that out for bid?
Well, the reason we went and had the attorney's office to look at the piggyback was to, one, to make
Yeah, if
sure
we piggyback,
legally
fine.
we can do that, and with the cost savings that hopefully would occur from being able to
That's what I'm
piggyback
trying to
on that
do.
piece. Secondly, I think the vendor that we used and some of the subcontractors there are somewhat intertwined when you're talking about
That's what
doing
worries
the
me.
actual, well, believe it or not, I mean, they all are like that. They do the study and then they actually sub, from what limited knowledge I got, they sub with each other with different levels of expertise. So whether it's one company or the other one, they will still be using each other for resources. So if you get one, he's going to go to the other person because there is limited knowledge
so
in that
few of them.
area. It's so
Okay.
few of them, and
Okay, it
and
just-
because they did. No, that's a good question,
Yeah.
though. But but no.
Like we're breaking our own policy if we
Right.
just go back to them.
And the piece with the schools, I think eventually we want to get to a place where we are sharing resources with the school and using the oversight either through the auditor's office or the minority business office that they have or a combined one to be able to do this
Love that.
jointly so we don't have one here and one there.
Right.
But we got to catch them up first and make sure that, because you can legally be sued if you're doing something based on a study that the schools had versus a study that we had, and it is. I mean, I know it sounds weird, but you can. And if we do something that the schools had and the study did not reflect that, then we would be in violation of what the study is. That's why you need that policy. Mr. Moody.
Well, my concern is the same thing as the vice mayor, and I don't think that concern was answered. We can catch them up, we can piggyback them up, but I want to see some competitive pricing. It seems like we're pretty cozy with this vendor. The vendor did a study saying this is what you need, then all of a sudden, I know the school system signed into a long-term agreement with her. I'm of the mind that before we spend additional money, we need to define the scope of work, and I would think it would need to go through the procurement process. And if that vendor that's doing business with the school system is priced the best on our scope of work, then we go with them. If not, we align ourselves with another vendor. I'm all for economies of scale, but I don't want to go into it blind.
Okay, very good.
Okay?
Dr. Edmonds.
I'd like to ask Superintendent Brace a question. Did you hire that person new just to do that for the disparity study? Or was that a person that was already there that you used?
No, that was a vacated position that once we hired the person, that was one of the duties that they had, was to monitor the MWBE process.
Okay. So, Mayor, isn't it possible and probable that there might be somebody already under the auspices of our city manager that might be able to get into that and do it?
not to develop the policy, but to actually run the program.
Right, that's what I'm talking
Once we get the
about.
program up and running, which is, I think, a few meetings ago, we had a dialogue about making sure that that resided under the auditor, because it is, in essence, once you develop the policy, it then becomes an audit function, because you're going to develop a policy and then you're going to give it to the manager. And the manager's job is to implement it. And then from that point on, what we do is measure or audit whether or not we are adhering to our policy when it comes to contracting opportunities. And that's where I think the school's expertise and the audit function, somewhere we can merge that down the road. But yeah, you're right on target, but I think we've got to get the policy created first. And I think that's one of the reasons why several council people had concerns of not just doing the whole package that the schools had and just breaking it out and just getting the policy done. Once we get a policy, then we can look at those other things. And a lot of that stuff probably can be done under the audit function or utilizing the personnel in the school. So that was the reason in saying, let's break the policy piece out, and then these other implementing and oversighting and all of that that's in the contract that the school system has. We didn't want to add all that in to get to Bill's point. If we did want to do that, you can go out, and then there are multiple folks that are in management services that can do some of those things.
Exactly.
Or the auditor could say, we can take that on and do that with in-house. But at least you've broken it up and you haven't made it all one whole piece. But that's a valid point. Yeah, Dr. Wood.
Just don't want to confuse several stages. We're just at the policy stage. A lot of the discussion I'm hearing is dealing with implementation. And also, just want to remind council that when this disparity issue was initially proposed, it was supposed to have been a joint venture with City Council, and council decided not to do it at that time and has now incurred a higher cost than it should have occurred had it gone along with the school board from the beginning. And so to go back and revisit that again by going through another process is going to also incur a higher cost, because there are some cost savings with the process that we're looking to go right now. Also, just want to remind council too that policies like this tend to be challenged, and the fact that the expertise that is already on board, having argued before the Fourth Circuit Court, I think brings us a resource that's very invaluable. So just want to remind council of that.
Okay. Mr. Meeks, did you have?
No, you answered my question.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? So what we want to do, if we can move forward, I wanted to bring those stakeholders together so we can get that information for us, but we want to make sure that outside of doing a policy, we are not authorized to do anything else because council is not interested in doing any of that. So we want a policy developed so we can move forward with the other things that we want done. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else there? Okay, good. Mr. Ashby, did you have anything else that was on that email?
No, that's it.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, now we got a motion to go into closed session. Somebody want to take us in closed, Dr. Whitaker?
I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A3 for the purpose of discussing the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically regarding 4300 George Washington Highway, tax map 461, parcel 8 through 11, and pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-311A7 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation and open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the city, specifically regarding the relocation of the Confederate monument at the intersection of Court Street and High Street, and pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.23-3711A1 for the purpose of discussing the performance of a member of City Council.
Okay. A second.
Second. I don't know if I can second.
Discussion?
Yes, sir.
The Confederate monument, that's been well publicized. Why are we doing that in closed session? I think that should be a public conversation. It's certainly been a public conversation, still is. So why don't we have that in open session?
Okay, Dr. Wood.
We haven't discussed the litigation strategy in open session.
And that's what this is. This is the litigation strategy bill. This isn't just talking on.
Well, I think it should be, I feel it should be a public conversation, so
Okay.
I'll vote no for
Okay,
that.
very good. All right, any other comments? All right, it's been moved in second. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Dr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
No.
Ms. Summers?
No.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mayor Wright?
Yes.
We are in closed. Thank you.
And the first item